Hey everyone. So I wanted to quickly do a plugin comparison. I got some new plugins over Black Friday, big shocker, and some of them actually look pretty familiar. And I wanted to show how you can dig a little deeper into looking at what EQ curves are actually being applied and in each of the plugins. So kind of impromptu, I figured I'd just show you kind of what I'm looking at. So I got the Black Rooster pack, which comes with a Pultec clone in there, and I also already have the Universal Audio Pultec stuff. So it's just a legacy one, but whatever. And so I figured I'd take a look and kind of compare them to see what they're actually doing. And so I've got a tool called Plugin Doctor, which makes this really pretty cool to do the comparison on. And it made the window go away. All right, well, maybe I'll just keep those over here. Yeah. We'll just keep those over there. So first thing, notice if we turn them off, basically I'm sending a -5 dB signal into them. So when they're off, they're exactly as you'd expect. So if I turn on the Black Rooster, you notice interesting behavior right off the bat is it boosts it up about ½ dB, but also cuts off the low end. Now this is super low. So I mean, this is 20 hertz right here. So really, in the audible range, it doesn't do a whole lot, but just something interesting to note. And then, funny enough, the Universal Audio version here boosts it up a few more dB, but it largely remains flat. So if you've ever wondered what each of these knobs is actually doing in the Pultec, this Plugin Doctor program will give you a way of actually visually seeing what is happening behind the scenes. So, for example, if we set our low frequency to 60 hertz here and then start boosting it, we can see the actual shape that's happening in that boost. So pretty interesting stuff. Now, obviously, this is blaring way over the 0 dB line. So this would be clipping like a mofo if this was actually in the DAW. But because this is running in 32-bit float and blah, 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 you can actually have positive dB without clipping. But this would be aggressively clipping at this 0 mark. Which means that you'd have to either turn it down or change your gain staging model. Anyway, or use the trim. So hey, now we're no longer clipping if we want that massive boost. But we'll leave it there for now. So pretty interesting to see exactly where it's boosting on. And of course 60 hertz is right about here, which makes sense. Though it looks like it's really more centered around 50, but whatever. And so here we can actually kind of compare the two and say, hey, if we set the UA to the same and we do that same boost about a little under 5. So you can see they're actually pretty similar. A different starting point there. And I don't actually have a volume attenuator on the UA version. But anyway, you can kind of see how that works. And then we change it to 100 hertz. Again, pretty similar, but here's where some of the differences are in the various plugins. And this is only really showing the EQ side of things. If it's doing other things like saturation, you're not going to see it in this graph. There are ways to look at harmonics and things like that, but I'm not super familiar with how to do that. They have this graph that does a whole bunch of stuff, But I'm not even going to try to talk to it again because I don't know the software that well. I'm still kind of figuring it out. But pretty interesting there. And then one of the things that a lot of people talk about with the Pultec is this ability to attenuate at the same time. And so for a long time, I wondered, what is it actually doing? And so it's pretty much doing exactly what we think. It's just doing it at two different frequency points. So here we can see that it starts dipping ahead. So it creates this boost and then a cut. And so you'll see that it also drastically dropped the overall level. So when you do the attenuation, it kind of makes up for this massive bump that we did right there, where here we're breaking unity right here. So this would be normally clipping. If we go up here and then attenuate 2, now it actually brings it under the clipping point. So it's kind of interesting how drastically these two affect each other. And then we'll do the same thing. We'll just put on 5 and 5 just for fun. And do the same thing on the UA side. Now you notice that's quite a bit different. If we... See, I can't change the volume level of the UA, so I'll just bring... There we go. So I'm just going to boost the Black Rooster one to be a little closer. So see, pretty similar, but still pretty different. So same kind of idea. And then of course we're not actually pushing any real audio through here. We're just, looking at what it's doing. I think it's just sending like a sine wave or something. So anyway, I find this to be pretty interesting to see exactly what's happening. So maybe if there's a sound that you really like here, you can see what it's doing and say, oh, okay, so it's boosting up, in this case, centered around 30 hertz, so really low. And then it's cutting down at, what was that, 350? And so if you like that sound, you could get that in any EQ, really, just by knowing that, hey, when I boost here, oops, I zoomed in way too close. How do I go back? Ah, there we go. That, hey, when we boost here, maybe I'll do a little cut after, and that makes it so you're going to notice some of these changes a little bit more. Like you will notice this boost here more when you also carve out a little bit after it. So let's take a look. So that's the low end in this low triangle here. Let's take a look at the opposite side. So let's go ahead and zero these out. All right, those are zeroed out. And look at what's happening on the high end here. So we have our attenuation frequency selection. So we'll put it on 10 on each, and then attenuate the signal here. So we'll just put it again at 5. So you notice the Black Rooster is way more aggressive in this low pass filter. It's got a way more aggressive slope than the Universal Audio does. Because here, got to figure at 10K, we're only dropping about 8 dB. At 10K in the Black Rooster, we're dropping a lot more. I don't even know what that is. I wonder if I can zoom out here and see more. I bet you I can. I just don't know how to do it. That would be very interesting to see, though. Yeah, I have to see if we can see stats below 10 dB. Although, I could probably just boost it up here. There we go. So that kind of shows us the slope, which is pretty steady. So yeah, pretty interesting. And if we push up the level here, we'll just say, hey, we're sending it as 0 dB, or close to 0. And then we can also see the slope a lot more too. So pretty interesting. I think you're going to have very different sounds out of these two plugins that are doing, in theory, the same thing. One thing you'll notice too is that if I push it beyond Unity here, neither one of these plugins is hitting a virtual analog ceiling. So some plugins, when they emulate the analog side, they will take a shit right at that line where it'll just be blowing up and they'll be nasty. And they won't actually let you get past this Unity point or this 0 dB. So neither one of these plugins is religiously emulating the analog. Otherwise, they would limit there. So that's kind of interesting. So let's see what else we can do here. If we set it at 20K, again, quite different curves, pretty interesting. And then, is that 5K, which is right here. So that's a significant difference between those two on the high end. If we just crank that up. Alright. So in order to be similar there, you've got to crank the UA version up. Pretty interesting. And then here we have this triangle, which is going to be the high boost. So let's not attenuate. Let's see what they do on their own. Move this way up. That loud, obnoxious clanking noise of my dogs walking around the house. Alright, so let's go ahead and we'll just leave it at 8K and we'll boost it at 5. Bunka bunka. And let's move these over here since we're looking at the high end. So pretty similar there. And if we change the Q, interesting that it doesn't just widen it, but it also doesn't boost as much when it widens. And then in the UA version, so those are actually pretty close. I don't many people would hear the difference between that, myself included. And then, just like before, we can attenuate at the same time as boosting. So let's go ahead and attenuate by 3. And you see in both cases, kind of doing the same thing it did on the bass side, but it creates a dip. And so we're going to dip first and then boost a little higher. So it's kind of scooping those out, which is probably why this EQ has such a unique sound to it. You know, I'm not the history buff on the sound stuff, so I'm not even going to try to describe the various evolutions of this. But that is really interesting how it does that. And then of course we can change where the center frequency is around the boost. So here with 3K, obviously this is going to be around 3K, which it is. And same thing here. So it's interesting that the highs in both of these plugins are pretty similar, or a lot closer at least, than the low end, which is pretty drastically different in comparing. And who knows, maybe like one over the other. I'm of the mind that I'm not personally vested in getting the most perfect emulation of gear like this, because I don't have, well, really for this, I don't have any experience with the analog. I've been all in the box forever, never even touched these units in real life. So to me, I don't really care if it sounds exactly like the original, but I do care if it sounds good, and it sounds good for the mix that I'm doing. So anyway, I figured I would just show, this tool on how you can, see what's actually happening, at least from an EQ curve perspective. Now, there's also things like phase differences. So actually, why don't we go ahead and show that briefly, because I think phase is really interesting as well. So let's go ahead and not boost and not attenuate. All right, we're pretty much flat here. And let me mute the UA version. All right, so we can't see the UA anymore. Goodbye. All right, so this is actually showing phase now. So what's interesting when we look at this curve, so it's got a high pass on here. And we'll also notice that the phase goes out with that high pass, which is pretty typical. In a non-linear phase EQ, you're going to have some kind of phase behavior in all of your boosts and your cuts, depending on what the type of filters that you're doing, whether it's a high pass or shelf or bell and all that. So that's kind of interesting right out the bat that it's flipping phase, but the phase again is 20 hertz is right here. So it's not like this is hugely in the listenable range, that there is some. But let's take a look at this. If we boost here at 60, let's take a look to see what's happening to the phase. We'll see that the phase starts to shift with it. And then, whoop, so we actually have a little negative shift plus positive. Oops, I did it again. All right, there we go. Around this 500 hertz center point, looks like. Of course, we're making some pretty big changes here. That's what it was before. So we're doing a pretty heavy-handed swing here. But it's just interesting to see the phase changes with that. Now you'll see more aggressive phase shifts with things like high pass and low pass filters. Like if we were to look at this on a really broad booster cut, well in this case just boost because that's all this plugin does, we'll probably see a lot less drastic of a phase shift. Yeah, see how much we were boosting there and how the phase was not as drastic. The sharper we go, the more we're going to have some of that phase shift, and it's going to be centered around that center frequency. So here we're at about 7K, which is lined up with there, and you'll see the center point is around 7K, where we have phase shift before and after. and it always kind of curves around that center frequency. Now, whether or not that matters or not is a whole different discussion. Some people are crazy about it, about how the phase is going to be ruined, especially if you slap this on a bunch of different tracks and it stacks up. I don't really care. Whatever sounds good is good. And every EQ since the dawn of time, if it's not a linear phase EQ, does some kind of phase shifting. So I think we're accustomed to how it sounds anyway. Anyway, those are my 2 cents ramblings. I'm going to go ahead and stop now because really I'm getting beyond the initial point. But I just wanted to share kind of just how you can get a different look into some of these plugins. And it's really interesting. So cool.